Death is the ultimate and unavoidable unknown. This shared fate is what distinguishes us as unquestionably and unremarkably human, mortal, and fading beings. In Greek mythology, there was a deity responsible for bringing a peaceful death, Thanatos. Despite being more welcome than the arrival of more evil entities, Thanatos became the name that was spoken with bated breath. He is the twin brother of Hypnos and the son of Nyx the night and Erebus the darkness. Like many of Nyx's children, Thanatos may be considered a personified spirit or a daemon rather than a full-fledged deity. But Thanatos presented himself, regardless of his fame, as ancient Greece's all-encompassing death deity during a peaceful or otherwise non-violent death. Moreover, he did not often manifest at the scene of violent killings, because that was the domain of his sisters, the Caries. As a mere embodiment of death, Thanatos was not portrayed often. But when he was, he would be an attractive winged boy dressed in black and wielding a sheathed sword. Also, he was rarely represented without his twin brother Hypnos, who was nearly similar to him, but for a few minor features. Thanatos is featured in a few paintings as a dark-haired guy. According to Greek mythology, Thanatos' sword was extremely important. The blade was used to chop the hair of a dying person, symbolizing their death. Legend says that the death bestowed by Thanatos was considered to be the most ideal one. According to folklore, Thanatos would appear before mortals in their dying hour and end their lives with a soft touch. It is critical to realize that Thanatos operated on the fate's command, constrained by the fate of one's life. He couldn't act on his own, and he couldn't defy fate by deciding when an individual's time was over. Thanatos needed perfect timing and steel nerves to perform his job. He was not a weak-willed divinity. In the first scene of Euripides' tragedy, Alcestis, Apollo accuses Thanatos of being hateful to mortals and a horror to the gods for refusing to postpone someone's time of death. Thanatos' reply, "You cannot always have more than you deserve." There is no real reason as to why he became the god of death. He was simply born into it. It's difficult to say when Thanatos was born, although it was most likely before the Titanomachy. Cronus, after all, presided during the golden age of man, when men had no hardship and died pleasantly in their sleep. While this is an excellent example of Hypnos-Thanatos teamwork, the cause of death may have been more complex at the time. Thanatos has a small part in Greek mythology. He's referenced frequently, ominously hinted here and there, but in appearance is rare. However, we are aware of 3 myths in which Thanatos plays an important role. While the messages in these myths differ, one theme is consistent: you cannot escape fate. The first of the 3 myths occurred during Homer's Iliad's Trojan War. Sarpedon, a brave Trojan War soldier, had just fallen in a fight with Patroclus. He was Zeus's son from the Lycian prince Laodamia. Variations in Greek mythology depict him as Zeus's son via the Phoenician princess Europa. As a result, he is Minos's and Rhadamanthus's brother. Zeus was severely injured when the Lycian prince fell. He was about to intervene to save Sarpedon when Hera reminded him that other gods' children were falling, and that saving his son would cause an uproar. Zeus, unable to stand watching Sarpedon in the midst of the battlefield carnage, instructed Apollo to call the twin brothers Sleep and Death. The brothers were supposed to transport Sarpedon back to his homeland, the great green region of Lycia, where he would be properly buried. The second tale was about a king named Sisyphus. Now Sisyphus ruled Corinth. This guy was universally hated as he broke Xenia by murdering visitors and reigning in a palace of blood and deceit. When Zeus had enough of Sisyphus's disrespect, he sent Thanatos to imprison him in Tartarus. Thanatos, of course, obeyed and brought Sisyphus there, but Sisyphus was as slick as a snake, and Thanatos was a little too unsuspicious. In the following chain of events, Sisyphus captured and chained Thanatos in Tartarus. The only god who seemed to notice Thanatos' absence was Ares. Why? Because no one was dying in battles. Ares released Thanatos because he was more annoyed by bloody fights becoming dull than by the disruption of the natural order of things. He also ended up handing Sisyphus over by the scruff of his neck. Sisyphus then had the guts to lie to the underworld queen Persephone and gaslight his wife from beyond her graveyard. He remained a nuisance until Hermes brought him back to the underworld for good. The third one is the death of Alcestis. It all starts when King Admetus, a fairy, marries Princess Alcestis, the lovely daughter of King Peleus. Unfortunately for Alcestis, her new husband neglected to offer a sacrifice to Artemis after their wedding. So, the snake Admetus, found wrapped in his wedding bed, were taken as a warning of early death from his ignorance. Apollo, the Millennia's wingman, and Admetus's old tenant got the fates drunk enough to guarantee that if someone else volunteered to die in Admetus's place, they would accept it. When his death drew close, no one was willing to die for him except his young wife. Admetus was depressed, but he finally found Heracles, who agreed to battle death to rescue his wife's soul. Thanatos obviously lost, and Alcestis came back. There is, however, a second, maybe older version. The plot is the same until it comes to how Alcestis returns from the grave. When it comes down to it, Alcestis' survival depends on the goddess Persephone's compassion. According to tradition, Persephone was moved by Alcestis' sacrifice and commanded Thanatos to return her soul to her body. Because Thanatos and other deities rarely interact, his relationship with each is open to interpretation. Except for his twin, parents, and a few other siblings, he most likely kept them at arm's length. He would include the Moirai, or the Fates, as he depended on their control over man's fate to know when to interfere with his services. Thanatos most certainly interacted with Hades and other members of Hades' entourage as an underworld dweller dealing with mortal death. The judges of the dead, Charon, and the many water gods have inhabited the rivers of the underworld would all be familiar to Thanatos. Furthermore, Thanatos was most likely in contact with Hermes, who served as a delivery boy, escorting the souls of the deceased to the underworld. In the past, the relationship between Hades and Thanatos was misunderstood. They have been misidentified as father and son, with the king of the underworld acting as the father. Another popular misconception is that Thanatos is a manifestation of Hades, or vice versa. This is not true. They are two completely separate deities with a working relationship since their realms are linked. If the word Thanatos reminds you of Thanos, you aren't alone. In fact, Thanos, the big bad villain of Marvel's Avengers Endgame and the man whose snap was heard round the world, is partially inspired by Thanatos. Crazy, right? You know what else is crazy? You reaching here and still not liking this video. So do that right away. We'll see you next time. Until then, goodbye.